The Ryzen 3600 is here. Now we can finally see if all the hype was worth it. What I've done is I've gotten a CPU from each generation of Ryzen and put them head to head in some basic productivity tests as well as gaming. First, I have the Ryzen 7 1700 at both stock and overclocked to 3.9 GHz. Then I have the Ryzen 5 2600 at stock and overclocked to 4.1 GHz. And finally, the new kid on the block, the Ryzen 5 3600 at stock settings. I did take a quick look at overclocking the 3600, and I decided it would be best to make a video dedicated just to overclocking, so stay tuned for that one. All the tests were done on the ASRock X470 Taichi motherboard. The CPUs were all cooled using the Fractal Design Celsius S24. 2 8GB DIMM sticks of Corsair Vengeance LPX RAM were used for all the testing. The 1700 and the 2600 were running at 3400 MHz, but the 3600 was running at just 2666 MHz. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. The video card used was the Zotac GTX 1070 Mini. The power supply is the EVGA 650GQ. The OS drive is a 250 gig Western Digital Blue SATA 3 M.2 SSD. The game drive is a Team Group L5 Lite 1TB SSD. Time for the benchmarks. TimeSpy, looking at the CPU scores. The 3600 is 6% lower than the 1700 at stock. The 3600 is 22% lower after you overclock the 1700. The 3600 is 13% higher than the 2600 at stock, and there's only a 4% difference after you overclock the 2600. Firestrike, the 3600 is 17% faster than the 1700 at stock in the physics test, and is 78% higher in the combined test. The 3600 is 1% lower in the physics test and 40% higher in the combined test after overclocking the 1700. The 3600 is 14% higher in the physics test and 25% higher in the combined test when having the 2600 at stock. The 3600 is only 3% higher in the physics test and 11% higher in the combined test after overclocking the 2600. Most of the games tested are using the low preset in an attempt to remove the GPU bottleneck, which in Dirt 4 didn't work. All 3 CPUs managed to hit a GPU bottleneck at both stock and overclock speeds. In Resident Evil 2, we start seeing the power of the new Zen 2 CPUs. The 3600 on average is 21% faster than the 1700 at stock, and is 10% faster when the 1700 is overclocked. The margins are a little tighter against the 2600. The 3600 on average is 10% faster than the 2600 at stock, and only 6% faster when the 2600 is overclocked. Far Cry 5, the 3600 on average is 18% faster than the 1700 at stock, and is 8% faster when the 1700 is overclocked. The 3600 on average is 9% faster than the 2600 at stock, and 5% faster when the 2600 is overclocked. The Division 2 tells much the same story. The 3600 on average is 16% faster than the 1700 at stock, and is 8% faster when the 1700 is overclocked. The 3600 on average is 9% faster than the 2600 at stock, and is only 4% faster when the 2600 is overclocked. Vermintide 2, the 3600 on average is 17% faster than the 1700 at stock, and is 10% faster when the 1700 is overclocked. The 3600 on average is 11% faster than the 2600 at stock, and only 3% faster when the 2600 is overclocked. Counter-Strike Global Offensive, the 3600 on average is 25% faster than the 1700 at stock, and is 9% faster when you overclock the 1700. The 3600 on average is 11% faster than the 2600 at stock, and is 8% faster after overclocking the 2600. An average of all the games tested, the 3600 is 16% faster than the 1700 at stock, and is 7% faster when you overclock the 1700. The 3600 is 9% faster than the 2600 at stock, and is only 5% faster after you overclock the 2600. Performance Test 9 by PassMark, the 3600 did quite well, managing to nearly match the overclocked 1700 in compression and sorting. The extra 4 threads did help the 1700 in integer math and encryption, but I was surprised to see that the overclocked 2600 was higher as well. My best guess is this is a memory bottleneck, since the RAM is only at 2666 for the 3600. The 3600 did really well at the floating point test as well as the physics and single thread test. In PCMark 10, the 3600 was able to pull off a full sweep, even managing to overcome the extra 4 threads of the 1700 in the content creation portion. Cinebench R20 single core benchmark, the 3600 scored 51% higher than the 1700 at stock, and 22% higher when the 1700 is overclocked. The 3600 scored 21% higher than the 2600 at stock, and 15% higher than the 2600 when it was overclocked. Cinebench R20 multi-core benchmark, the 3600 scored 15% higher than the 1700 did at stock, but was 8% lower when the 1700 is overclocked. The 3600 scored 26% higher than the stock 2600 and 13% higher than the overclocked 2600. The score of 3585 is a bit lower than other scores I've seen. I would probably contribute this to the memory speed. This was the test I was most interested in, the Cinebench R20 single core at 4 GHz, so I have all CPUs set to 4 GHz. So clock for clock, the 3600 scored 15% higher than the 1700 and 13% higher than the 2600. So, are these Matisse CPUs really that great? Simply put, yes, they are. But there are a few asterisks that go along with that. When testing, I noticed the CPU was really warm for stock settings, and then I noticed the CPU would boost well over the posted 3600 MHz on all cores when playing a game. This is thanks to the new precision boost. These new CPUs now work a lot like the NVIDIA GPU boost. Mostly depending on the temperature of the CPU, the Ryzen 3000 series will boost the frequency as much as it can to obtain more performance, as long as the CPU cooler can maintain safe temperatures. In gaming, I typically saw the frequencies jump between 4025 and 4150 MHz. Now that's more than 500 MHz higher than the posted all-core boost. So AMD is now auto overclocking their CPUs, is essentially what this means. Which is good for most everyone. You just simply put the CPU in the motherboard, get a decent cooler, and you're done. The CPU and the motherboard take care of the overclocking. Now I do have a small issue with this, that we are then relying on the motherboard manufacturers and their auto voltages. Because with the current BIOS that I have on the Taichi, the auto setting has the VID voltage peaking at 1.5 volts, and the V-core voltage is peaking at 1.48 volts. These peaks last only milliseconds, but they are adding extra heat, and over time they may be causing damage to the CPU. The last issue I have isn't with the CPU, but with the growing pains that will be lingering with the launch of the 3000 series, i.e. support. The motherboard manufacturers now have 3 generations of hardware to update for, so there will be a longer delay whenever an update needs to be put out, or at least a higher chance that the update will be delayed. Now I've delayed this video in hopes that ASRock would release a new BIOS for the X470 Taichi, but no such luck. With the current BIOS, the X470 Taichi is unable to post with RAM set above 3000 MHz and have it be stable. which is why some of my testing is off, but there's nothing I can do about that at this point in time. I have to wait for the new BIOS. With all that being said, would I recommend buying the new Ryzen 3000 series? Yes, but not yet. I'd recommend waiting until maybe Black Friday or thereabouts and see if you can get a good deal, because X570 motherboards are quite expensive. If you are somebody who wants to keep your existing motherboard, I would again recommend waiting until all these growing pains or whatnot are sorted. And a side note, I would not recommend using a B350 motherboard, mainly because the VRMs will likely not hold up very well. But if you do have a higher end X370 or a higher end B450 motherboard, you should be fine. Well, that's all I have for now, all the normal stuff. If you like the video, you know what to do. Click that subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.